You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Hello and welcome to Literary Treks, TFM's books and comics show all about Star Trek. I am but one of your hosts, Casey Pettitt, and with me, as he is always, is the wonderful Jonathan Koan. How's it going, Jonathan?
I am happy because we have a new Star Trek book to talk about. It's a movie era book. It is Lost to Eternity by Greg Cox. And I really had a blast reading this because it covers a mystery behind one of my favorite movies, The Voyage Home, and the disappearance of Gillian Taylor.
What? That's right, actually, and we're
spoilers.
That's
no,
right.
It's not a spoiler.
It's actually, yeah, like there's that had no spoilers in it, and we are going to be talking to Greg Cox on today's episode, the author of Lost to Eternity, and he is not a spoilery person either. So you and I were talking on the other side of the page about how, most of the time you listen to Literary Treks and you assume spoilers, and unless you hear otherwise, well, this is you hearing otherwise. But I would encourage all listeners to go and read this because it is an excellent book, and spoiler alert for the end of the show. But well, before we get to the interview with Greg, just to remind everyone how to get a hold of us, you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please give us a star rating and a written review. That helps others find the show and would also let us know how you think we're doing. You can also find the network on X and Instagram at Trek FM, on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. And while you're on Facebook, you can find the network's private group called the Babel Conference. Just type BABEL in the search field and it will come on up. Also, we have a Goodreads group for Literary Treks, so definitely check us out there, and you can see what we're reading, what we're going to be reading, what we have read. We've got discussions on there if you want to talk to us, so check us out there. And lastly, go on to Patreon, patreon.com/TrekFM, and help support the show. It takes a lot of money to put these shows out for you, and it would be great to have your support. You can even join us as an associate producer with myself and Greg Rosier. So please check us out there. Well, Jonathan, we don't really have any news to cover this time, so why don't we kind of hit the time machine and get lost in eternity.
I see what you did there.
Well, Jonathan, we are very lucky and excited to have none other than Greg Cox with us this week to talk about his new Star Trek The Original Series book, Lost to Eternity, which just came out yesterday as we're recording this. And Greg, welcome to Literary Treks.
Thank you for having me. And like I said, the timing could not be any better.
Yes. Yeah, we were just talking. Yeah, came out yesterday, and then we were just talking that Shore Leave is this weekend, so you're going to be having it available at your convention this weekend. So I'm not sure when this podcast will be out. It might be out this weekend while you're at Shore Leave. So if you're listening to this and in the Pennsylvania area, go check it out.
Right. Heading out to, for those who don't know, I'm heading out to a Star Trek convention, Shore Leave, which is in beautiful Lancaster, Pennsylvania, this very weekend. So packed up and ready to go.
There you go. Well, Greg, let's just jump right into it. And for any listeners who haven't read this, you should go read it. I think we'll probably get into spoilers pretty quickly here.
Oh, yeah.
But
I'll try not to be too spoilery while talking about the book. Big picture stuff.
Okay.
We'll do big picture stuff.
Okay. Well, before we get really into any of the details, can you just kind of tell us about the genesis of the book? I know that, from some of the stuff you've posted online and then I think in the acknowledgments as well, this book actually started back in 2020, and it's taken quite some time to come out. So can you kind of just tell us about the process of writing it and kind of, how it started and, how we got to today?
Well, like I said, I originally came up with the idea back in 2020, right at the very beginning of the pandemic, just to date it. I remember I was working in a Starbucks, and then suddenly I couldn't work in a Starbucks anymore. But yeah, the idea actually came, there's three, just big picture, there are three overlapping storylines in the book. This is a classic Trek book, a TOS book, and there's three different time periods that I alternate between. There's 2024, which is today, which was in the near future when I plotted this book 4 years ago. There is the TV era storyline that set during the original 5-year mission. And then there's a third storyline set during the movie era, somewhere between the 5th and 6th movies. And needless to say, in theory, at least, all these plots actually, which seem to be very separate, actually all converge and come together in hopefully unexpected ways. But the premise of it is the 2024 storyline, taking place today, is about a true crime podcaster who decides to do a podcast, you may identify with this, investigating the mysterious disappearance of a Dr. Gillian Taylor, a well-known marine biologist who went missing back in 1986, nearly 40 years ago. And yes, that was nearly 40 years ago. And I'll admit the idea came from this. We went through a period where my wife and I were listening to lots of true crime podcasts in the evening, like Serial and things, most of which involve, people who go mysteriously missing. And somehow it came to us, hey, what if someone decided to do a podcast about, whatever happened to Gillian Taylor from Star Trek 4? We all know who I'm talking about, right? There'd be Wells here. And so one of the storylines involves this woman, Melinda Silver, who is a true crime podcaster, digging in and trying to find out whatever happened to Gillian Taylor. And without giving too much away, she finds out that story is much more complicated than she realized. And that she's not the only person who is interested in a lot of strange stuff went around in San Francisco that week. There was a mysterious Russian spy who popped up on an aircraft carrier and then who mysteriously was, abducted from a operating room in a downtown hospital. There were some whales involved. There was a UFO sighting in the park. What the heck was going on in San Francisco back in 1986? And this segs into, and that's a good third of the book. And we got the idea from shamelessly sitting around listening to true crime podcasts and thinking, oh, great, well, someone would do that. In fact, in my book, my fictional podcast is called Cetacean. Welcome to Cetacean, a true crime podcast investigating, the disappearance of a marine biologist, 1986. I'm your host, Melinda Silver, etc. So I had fun trying to, do that. And then, like I said, there's some more standard Star Trek plots involving Kirk, Spock, and everything. And the third storyline, which is set in the movie era, is very much heavily focused on Saavik, and which I mentioned because people seem very excited just talking to fans. Because Saavik there's not a lot of Trek novels about Saavik. So she's very much front and center and the protagonist of one of the storylines. And she's actually on the cover of the book too. So it's cool.
Were there any restrictions on characters you could use from the voyage home or things you could mention? Or did you pretty much have free reign on what you could include with the mystery and the who she interviews and stuff?
No, honestly, this book went through the approval process pretty, pretty smoothly. There were just the usual minor tinkers. The only thing we ran into a little bit is I deliberately went back and had to vague up when the eugenics wars took place, because that's kind of, with Strange New Worlds, kind of tinkering with the timeline a little bit. To avoid trouble, I went back and kind of vagued up a little bit about some references to the eugenics wars, which are not really essential to the plot, but it was like, just, okay, let's avoid problems there. I was actually given a heads up that a certain Strange New Worlds episode was going to probably reset the eugenics wars a little bit, and maybe I should just be careful about that subject matter. But again, that came down to basically changing about 5 lines in the book. Okay. But otherwise, no, I mean, I had free reign. I mean, and yeah, I watched Star Trek 4 over and over and over again. And the main thing I had to remember, and this was not a director from CBS, was just remembering, and this came as a shock, just how long ago 1986 was. Nearly 40 years ago, was realizing that, Jillian's boss at the Cetacean Institute, remember her kind of asshole boss? Wait a minute, how old would he be now? Wait a minute, the old lady who got the new kidney, how old would she be now?
Yeah.
It's kind of shocking to realize that, even realizing that my heroine of that segment, Melinda, who is the podcaster, assuming that she's 20-something, she's not even have been born back then. I was also surprised well into the book to discover that the Alameda Naval Base doesn't exist anymore. It's not there.
That was surprising to me too.
Anymore. It was closed down a long time ago. So no running around the Alameda Naval Base in 2024,
Yeah, it made sense that there were a lot of kids because there's a couple of kids and grandkids that were interviewed of characters that showed up, because obviously those characters would not be able to be interviewed 40 years later.
I take it you've read the book?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. Oh, yeah. So, yes, in some cases, I don't think it's a big spoiler to reveal that the little old lady who got the kidney peel is not still with us, despite the new kidney from 40 years ago, But, But she
lived a decent life after that, though.
Yeah. And like I said, so that was sort of weird, just realizing that it was, wow, a long time ago. I keep running into fans online as I'm talking about the book who see the back cover copy that says something about, 40 years ago, a young marine biologist. Wait, no, you don't mean 40. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay. Now we all feel much older.
Yes. I noticed you avoided saying nuclear vessels anywhere in there, too.
I don't, nuclear vessels or, doing Chekhov's in dialect is kind of hard to do. It gets really kind of glaring when you do it in prose. So you go back and read some of the older Star Trek novels where they're trying very hard to sort of do it phonetically, and it hasn't aged well sometimes, And I know I find trying to do accents phonetically gets old really fast in prose, But, but Chekhov,
and I appreciate having it having it written out just in normal. We can hear it in our heads. We don't have to try to parse it as we're reading it. So I always appreciate when you just write it straight
in his thick Russian accent or whatever, But
yeah, exactly. With having Saavik, you'd mentioned earlier already that we haven't really gotten a lot of Saavik in the books. It's something I almost feel like we need a Lost Era book, just on Saavik and her growing up. And I know we've had some of her backstory before, which you've referenced in the book about her heritage and her time on Helgard. Was she always from the get-go a plan to have in the book, or was she somebody that kind of came along later that you added, noting that we needed somebody like her, or were you ever going to use Valeris or anything like that?
Well, I think to a certain degree, when it comes to the conception of the book, I'm having to throw my memory back 4 years. But I think part of the reason I want to include Saavik, besides the fact that she's neat, is the fact that was a way of, since I'm also doing there's a 5-year mission plotline in the book. It was a nice way of what makes the movie era different from the 5-year mission book? Well, for one thing, they had Saavik. And not only was that makes it a 5, I mean, yeah, you're on the Enterprise A, but that essentially that doesn't change the plot too much. Saavik, that makes it a movie era storyline, and there's a reason for it to be the movie era. And I also like to think, because I'm alternating back and forth, that, and yeah, I helpfully put dates at the beginning of every chapter, but still, just so that people didn't get confused, if you open up chapter 13, and that is illogical, Saavik says, is like the first sentence. Well, you instantly know you're not back in the era of the old TV series, oh, you're in the movie era. So there was I'm not sure how much this was planned in advance, but there was a definite advantage to making her very much the protagonist of the movie era storyline. Because, like I said, the minute you pick up a page, and if you pick up a page and it's McCoy saying, "Damn it, Spock," you don't know what era you're in. You open a chapter and, oh, well, there's Saavik right there front and center, and she's our viewpoint character. You know instantly which storyline you're in. And as you're reading this book, you realize, oh, we're not in the 5-year storyline with, Kirk and Spock and McCoy running around in their yellow and blue uniforms. Oh, Saavik is on the bridge. Saavik is at the helm. Speaking of Saavik, I will throw in another shameless plug here, is that, in fact, I have another Saavik story coming out next month. I wrote a story about Saavik for issue 12 of Star Trek Explorer magazine. And this is not a coincidence. Because the magazine is coming out next month, the book came out in July, sort of in the interest of synergy, I was actually asked, Greg, can you do a story that kind of ties in with the new book? And there isn't any real plot connection. I mean, you can read my book without reading the story and vice versa. But while looking for something that kind of was thematically linked, oh, well, how about I write another Saavik story? Especially since at that point I could see the fan reaction. The book had come out, Saavik's on the cover. People seemed very excited about seeing Saavik again. So when the magazine asked me, you want to do a story that kind of has some overlaps with your story, with the book, oh, well, how about I do another story? And that story is actually a passing baton story about Sulu leaving and Saavik joining, as Sulu kind of passes the baton onto Saavik, which was not something that I think had been done before. So that's a short story that sort of ties in with. I thought Saavik was a fun character writing. Yes, I did go back and read The Pandora Principle by Carolyn Clowes, which was sort of the book that really, really fleshed out her backstory. I went back and read that for research purposes.
So in the 2292 storyline, we have the Asari, which is like this new species that the Klingons and the Federation are all looking at. And they have a very long view of looking at history because of their longevity. Did you have another species that you were thinking about or that you drew a lot of inspiration from when you developed that species?
Ooh, once again, I'm going to throw in the disclaimer that, again, this was 4 years ago, and we've had a lot of stuff has happened. Since 2020. But I don't remember if as always, sometimes I bet at some point I must have looked to see if there was a pre-existing alien race I could use. But this is very much sort of a first contact situation. So because, however, this, without being too spoilery, this is a plot that spans 300 years or so. Long-lived characters and longevity is sort of a recurring theme in this storyline. Since it starts in 2024 and ends in 2292, there's sort of a continuing theme of longevity, time passing, and so I think sort of, I started with the premise of the Melinda storyline, the podcaster, and then, okay, how do I then get this into a Star Trek novel that will bring in Spock and Kirk? And then at some point I jumped from, okay, we're doing, we're not just going to do a TOS storyline, we're going to jump we're going to the end of the movie era. So by necessity, long-lived aliens ended up. One step leads to another as I'm sitting around in the Starbucks before, pre-pandemic, trying to just brainstorm this plot and figure out how to get 100,000 plus words out of, a podcast. Okay, so the original podcast premise, And indeed, one of the premises, like I said, I wanted it to be we wanted a big, thick book. So I kind of wanted an A plot, a B plot, and a C plot, because then that makes it easier to, get a nice, big, hefty. I always live in fear of running out of plot halfway through my novel. This book had plenty of plot. I like to think, if nothing else, this book had lots of plot. In fact, I'll confess that the contract for the book, without getting too nitty gritty, called for the book to be between 100 and 120,000 words long. I went way over. I went to 130,000 plus words. And thankfully, Pocketbooks did not ask me to cut it. I actually went over the maximum, because I sort of overcompensated. Well, I don't want to get, run out of plot and not end up with, oh my God, the book's almost over. I'm only at 80,000 words. No. I lots of plot, lots of characters, lots of intrigue. And suddenly the book got very long.
When we also, in both the series era storyline and the movie era one, we've really got a like first contact situations in both. One is a pre-warp civilization, so but it's still essentially like a first contact. So that's kind of one cool way to tie those two storylines together too. Is one species, one planet that they're trying to avoid contact with, as much as possible to carry out the mission on that planet. But then with the other, what they were in the future, in the movie timeline, getting to see them actually really attempting this first contact and the first kind of bits of this relationship with this species that they all kind of always knew about, but didn't, they were kind of reclusive, I guess. So, and really, if you,
I'm not sure how much of this was originally in my conception, but I leaned into it as I started writing the book. Again, I was very concerned with the reader always know what storyline they're in. If you notice, the TOS storyline is very much a planet-bound story. It's adventures on a planet. They visit a strange planet, and there's strange life forms and creatures and civilizations. Whereas in the movie era, that's almost all shipboard. It's all set either on the Enterprise, or it's set on the Klingon ship, or it's set on the Romulan ship. So again, it was another thing, just sort of, so if they're running around in the wilderness, encountering strange beasts, you're in the middle storyline, the TOS storyline. Most of the stuff is, airlocks and sick bays, and in terms of the setting, is all shipbound and in space for the Saavik storyline. And I'm not sure I conceived of that originally, but as I was writing the book, it was, this another way of sort of distinguishing. And indeed, the TOS story is very much in my head was conceived of as being much more of an action adventure storyline, kind of like the original series. There's lots of fights, there's lots of action, there's,
Yeah.
Whereas
that was a really good part of the story too, with the kind of the gladiator combat, type of stuff going on.
That's probably me indulging my sort of space opera. That's the most space opera. I had the podcast story, Modern Days, and then my sort of rough idea, and I leave it to readers to see how I pulled it off, was the planet they visit, which is a kind of barbaric pre-warp civilization. In my head was, okay, this is the TOS crew ending up on Mongo from Flash Gordon, or Barsoom from Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is your classic pulp space adventure planet with, Star Trek. So yes, of course, there was a gladiatorial match and arena and fierce beasts. And I was having much fun with sort of, almost old school planet stories kind of, adventure, which again, I have to distinguish that from the sort of modern day contemporary stuff of running around San Francisco in 2024 and the sort of up far space first contact storyline of the movie era, which is much more diplomacy and intrigue and everything. And my TOS TV era was much more one of the more exciting action-oriented episodes of TOS is what I was going for. So of course there's, strange beasts and fight scenes and judo flips and all sorts of other fun, all sort of the fun stuff,
Yeah, the karate chop. I remember Kurt gave somebody a karate chop in the neck or something like that.
I've got Yeoman Martha Landon is in the book, and she's in the middle part, and she was the yeoman from the Apple. And in the Apple, remember, she's got some very cool jujitsu, Emma Peel, karate, judo moves. So of course, without giving too much away, yeah, I leaned into that. Martha Landon can hold her own in a fight against a bunch of Klingons, so. Yeah, she was the one who played by Celeste Yarnell. She was Chekhov's girlfriend in The Apple, so she's back. I've used Martha Landon in a couple of books, partly because honestly I met Celeste at a convention years ago, and she was like, "Oh, you should write my character into a book," So I think I've done it 3 times now. I like it, so good. Why invent a yeoman when there's and she was kind of fun because, like I said, she's got her sort of She was kind of fun and lively, and I've met Celeste in person. It was cool, so I've put her in the times now.
Well, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about. I almost hesitate to call him the antagonist, because kind of every villain is the hero of their own story, and this character definitely is trying to do what he thinks is best for himself, for humanity, and everything. If you go back into your Wayback Machine in your memory and, kind of talk a little bit about the genesis of that character. If there was, if you looked at other characters throughout Star Trek to kind of, make them Flint is somebody who's been used a lot, especially I feel like recently in some of the books, and is even mentioned in this book too. But, was that a route you were going, or is this, did you really want to go with a completely original character for this person?
I think he was always an original character. Like I said, at some point, I keep throwing this disclaimer, but that was 4 years ago, and I've written a couple other books since, but all of it kind of follows from, okay, if I'm going to get a storyline that starts in 2024, you end up looking, without getting too spoilerly, a Flint-like character, because you need a connective tissue between the 3 storylines. And the weird thing was, one thing I will tell you was kind of weird, which is, I'll be honest, I wrote the 3 storylines, even though in the book they alternate. You're like, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I wasn't able to keep up that 1, 2, 3 eventually, because I kind of hit a point where, I kind of have to stop doing 1, 2, 3 for a while, because otherwise this storyline is going to do a spoiler for the other storylines in the future. And so you kind of, and by the time you get to the end, it's all, the last 3 or 4 chapters are all in the final storyline, because honestly, I couldn't just keep jumping back and forth, because otherwise there'd be spoilers. You don't want to find out how it all ends midway through while you're still reading the other 2 storylines. But individually, I wrote the 3 storylines, each of them one at a time, because I didn't want to lose momentum and have to keep mentally switching gears. So I wrote the whole 2024 storyline, and then I wrote the whole TOS era storyline, and then I wrote the whole movie era storyline, and then I had the very fun job of sitting down and trying to mesh them back, much mini diagrams, index cards, charts, diagrams, arrows, to get them all to fit together. And invariably, one of the things I found was interesting is that I sort of mentally introduced the character, certain character we're talking in one storyline. We discovered that when I put all the storylines together, we actually meet him at different stages of his life in a different order than I kind of mentally visualized it, because just, I wrote the book. I wrote the stories, book chronologically, basically, but the chapters are not chronologically. It would be boring just to have the first storyline and the third storyline. So, and there was a certain amount of trying to keep track, and there is supposed to be a character arc there. My idea basically is that the character, like you said, that he's not all bad. He starts out much more, a little bit nicer. He gets darker as the story goes by. And that was, at least my intent was that enough reverses, enough tragic. He gets more ruthless. The guy you meet in the 20 Saavik meets is not the same guy Melinda meets. He's, one of my weird inspirations is not Star Trek. I was kind of thinking of Peter Cushing in the Hammer Films Frankenstein movies, where if you watch those movies, at least in my interpretation, their continuity is loose between those movies because this was the 60s and continuity was not a thing. But in general, you can sort of see the character getting more and more ruthless. And, after, this time I've sacrificed so much, or there's been so many, this monster's going to work. And it has to all be worthwhile now after the last 7 monsters went berserk and killed people, and my lab went up in flames and the villagers attack. That's not literally what happens. To be clear, in the novel, there's no monsters made. There are no villagers attacking with pitchforks. But mentally, my mindset for the character was, after enough defeats, he gets reverses. He gets more ruthless as it goes on. And that's how I wrote the book when I wrote the book chronologically. It's like I wrote the book, in production order, but it wasn't, the chapters are different. So that was an interesting challenge when I finally sat down and started integrating them all and realizing, and I had to do some last minute rewriting because, this has to go because this is going to spoil something here. I need to go back and establish this. Because after I got the 3 pieces and had to assemble them like a jigsaw puzzle, invariably there was some smushing, pushing, shoving to make it all get into place. And like I said, pages of diagrams, index cards, and charts to make sure everything all fit together. It was one big giant jigsaw puzzle or crossword puzzle or something.
I think it was effective because when I was reading it, I noticed when the 2292 storyline just dropped. And we were just focusing on the first 2. And I looked and I saw how long it would take to get back to that. And I thought, oh man, I loved the first 2 as well, but I really liked that because I was really excited to see Saavik again. And then I got so engrossed in the mystery of the 2024 and the action of the 2268 storylines that I almost kind of forgot about it. And then when the 2292 storyline came back, that's about when I realized, that's why that this is included, like how it all tied together. So even though you wrote it in the, in a different order, it works really well in the way you did it here because it created great mystery.
Without being too spoilery, there's a moment, the climax of the 2024 storyline. There's a point where I hit a point in the Saavik storyline where you can't go any further without giving away the ending of the 2024 storyline. And I think I kind of realized that by necessity, I literally, and I think it worked at the end. When we finally get to the end, you're going to have to wait for the ending of the book. But then it's like the last 4 or 5 chapters. We've wrapped up the first 2 storylines. Now we know how those storylines ended now. And I don't have to worry about accidentally spoiling them. Now we will gear in and full bore into the ending of the Saavik storyline. But like I said, I'm being vague, but you can guess which moment I suddenly realized I can't go any further without giving away, in the Saavik storyline, without giving away the ending of the 2024 storyline, So, and I like to think there's a moment when the moments converge. I hope that I was really looking forward to writing that moment, so. But yeah, it's a tricky plot editing it all together. Yeah, I'll be curious to see how people and that's maybe one reason why I was so concerned with making sure that at any given moment you know what storyline you're in. Even though, like I said, I very nicely put the years at the top of every chapter. But still, people don't necessarily read the years, so. But okay, fine. Spock, Kirk and McCoy and the landing party are down on the planet, having action adventures. You know what storyline you're in. Saavik is in trouble. You know what storyline you is. You're running around San Francisco in 2024 with Melinda and her friends. You know what storyline you're in. So. So even if I'm jumping back and forth and telling the thing in a nonlinear fashion here, so.
Well, the mystery definitely holds throughout for sure. I mean, once you've moved away from that the 2292, the movie era storyline, and it kind of goes away for a while. I mean, I was excited to get back to that one too, but there was still enough happening in finishing the other two storylines, which the TV series era keeps going for a while. But there's still kind of some connective tissue between those two, like the 2024 and 2268 storylines that, I was totally engrossed in those by the time we, kind of got to the end of 2024, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then, racing to the end of the book to see how it all, finished out. So yeah, I definitely think that was all very effective there.
Like I say, it was interesting. Like I said, the reason, like I said, for writing them all, the three storylines, in my head, I wrote them chronologically. And and partly it was just so I could hold it all in my head. And also, like I said, just for writing wise, I'm not having to jump back and forth. Okay, I'm in the groove. I'm in the TOS groove. I'm going to keep writing TOS for the next month, until I finish. I'm in the 2024 groove. I'm not having to keep jumping back and forth, We will worry about sorting the plot lines out back later when we get to, all three of them together, and then we get I generally budgeted time into my schedule. Okay, and there's going to be a week or so of me pulling out my hair as I try to get these three storylines, And honestly, that's kind of how I wrote the last. Digressing for a second, that's kind of how I wrote the last couple Star Trek books I've written, both for Antares, Maelstrom, and Contest of Principles. If you notice, there's an A plot and a B plot and a C plot. The previous two, they were not separated chronologically, temporally. I had, Contest of Principles, which is my previous Star Trek novel, which came out in 2020. If you notice, there's three different planets. And I actually divvied up, so Kirk's on one planet, Spock's on one planet, and McCoy's. And I gave them each an individual adventure. And yes, I wrote each of those individual adventures, consecutively, and then went back and tried to mesh them. Just because I find trying to, stop, switch gears, you lose momentum. I'm plowing along on the Kirk plot line. We're just going to keep plowing along on the Kirk plot line, and then we'll write the McCoy plot line, and then we'll write the Spock plot line, and then the plot lines will all come together at the end. So that is my process. Okay, at least for writing big, thick books that have A plots, B plots, and C plots.
I mean, that I kind of think back to like the Eugenics Wars books too, and you were saying too earlier that you kind of had to kind of make a little more vague, like when the Eugenics Wars and everything happened, where, Melinda kind of has this like passing knowledge of the things that went on, or, I think maybe it was Dennis even that remembered the Chrysalis Project name. But we don't really go much, further into that, but I love the reference back to that because, not only are we getting, Greg Cox writing in 2024, but, the Star Trek stuff has happened, but we also got real life stuff like Skype and, the term Googling, like just like current, terminology and everything. But, then to think of it almost as a follow up to, the con, like at least the first two con books, in the Eugenics Wars books was really kind of fun.
And going back to those con books, which I wrote by God back in the 90s, what I did then was it was all kind of unknown and vague rumors. And without getting too much, Melinda, who's my podcaster, has a partner who is a conspiracy nut, and he's got all these crazy theories about secret eugenics wars and experiments and genetically engineered people and the government covering it up, and which indeed, so as we all know, this stuff will come out eventually. And one of the jokes of the thing is, notice carefully, pretty much all of Dennis's crazy, wild conspiracy theories, are actually still real. What's all that say about, Mark Twain meeting time travelers back in old San Francisco? What kind of nonsense? This isn't like that Mark Twain, this isn't like your crazy, Amelia Earhart was abducted by aliens theory again. So one of the sort of running jokes is that he seems like a crazy conspiracy nut, but they're all true, Or if you look at the Star Trek history according to Star Trek, but again, this is the stuff of nutty conspiracy theories in 2024.
So you have the book that the 2024 setting is set in the current year, and so certain terminology and slang still makes it in, but it's also because it's Star Trek and the nature of Star Trek, it's kind of alternate. So how did you decide on which types of slang and terminology from modern day that you would include and which stuff you probably wouldn't include in the book?
Well, it's supposed to be our time, because the idea is Star Trek is our future. Just like I said, there's the only differences are that there was a Russian spy caught on a naval vessel in California in 1986, but I wasn't really trying to make it too different, aside the fact that there was this whole sort of weird conspiracy theories about, Mark Twain meeting time travelers and secret genetic experiments into eugenics, going on in underground labs elsewhere in the world, possibly in India. Like I say, it was sort of fun just to sort of in the language to realize I like to think I may be the only Star Trek writer to use the phrase "Okay, boomer" Star Trek book.
And I noticed who, without spoiling it, I noticed who it said to, and I thought, you know what, I will allow it because that was very clever usage of it. So I thought that was very good usage of it.
Yeah, right. And but otherwise, my assumption was, as much as possible, the 2024 in that book is the 2024 of our world. And I'll admit that when I started plotting this book in 2020, I deliberately said it in 2024. I didn't realize the book wasn't going to come out until it was in the near future. I said it into 2024 because I was hoping by 2024 I wouldn't have to worry about social distancing and masks. For better or for worse, I was right. I mean, COVID is still out there, and yeah, I'm going to be wearing a mask at my convention this weekend. But I was a little worried about, back in 2020, I wasn't sure, can you write a book now where people are just running around and going to movie theaters and getting in cabs and aren't wearing masks? I kind of made the executive decision, okay, if I set this book in 2024, I'm not going to have Melinda wearing a mask or worried about social distancing. I didn't want to get something that would then date the book by the time it kind of came out. But it was back when I plotted the book in 2020, back at the very beginning of all this. I remember I was literally sitting in that Starbucks plotting the book, and I went up to get a snack, and I was told, "We're sorry, we can't give you any. We're not using forks or China plates anymore because of the pandemic." And I was like, "Oh, okay, the world is changing, But again, it was a question of, do I have to acknowledge in 2020? You don't know. In 2024, what is the world going to look like? I had to extrapolate that. I'm just going to assume that I'm not going to worry about that while I am writing this book. Melinda will run around and talk to people as much as she wants. She's not going to be sequestered in her apartment, and touching things with plastic gloves the entire book. Because again, that would be hard to write a book. And also, like I said, I don't know, would that make the book incredibly dated when it comes out in 2024? Or whenever the book was, I didn't know when the book was going to come out, But yeah, there's a reason that I jumped in. I plotted the book in 2020 with the expectation, hopefully by 2024, that I could write a book where Melinda's not wearing a mask the whole book. Maybe she should be, but she's not. Okay.
I bet Dennis was wearing a mask. He seemed like somebody who'd wear a mask.
Okay. Not to try to avoid COVID, just to try to avoid whatever the government's,
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's paranoid there. Yeah.
The Deep Space Nine episode Past Tense takes place during 2024, but we don't really kind of touch that in this book. Was that intentional, with sanctuary districts and the Bell riots, which we could argue happened later in the year?
I'm not sure that occurred to me. Like I said, I chose 2024 not because, that's the year of the Bell riots, so much as I was
just pushing it,
trying to figure out near future around the time, trying to guesstimate when the book was going to come out. I
mean, there's nothing in the book that counters any of that, stuff from that episode. We just don't really.
Yeah, in hindsight, maybe I should have thrown in a reference to the sanctuary districts, but I like I said, I was mostly thinking that the 2020 story was pretty much, set in and around San Francisco in 24, the world we know of, and not, except for the fact that there have been time travelers visiting in a stolen Klingon ship, and there have been other odd incidents throughout history, and that Flint was a thing, etc. I will mention one thing in hindsight. I do mention, like I said, longevity is a thing. There's the Pelia character from Strange New Worlds, played by Carol Kane. I'll say right now, she is not mentioned in the book because by the time she was introduced, the book was in copy editing Galaxy, and I was like, oh, had I known about her, I would have worked her in, but I didn't know about her, and by the time I wrote the book back, like I said, I plotted the book way back in 2020, and then
yeah. I mean, if you were going to take some time to do some rewrites,
it's a long process of it getting approved and written, edited, copy edited, proofread, scheduled, waiting for a slot to open up, juggling schedules and things. But so by the time they introduced Pelia in season 2 of Strange New Worlds, I could go back and have to rewrite. The book was already it's like, I'm just going to quietly, it would have been nice to have mentioned her, she fits thematically into this book, but at that point it was too late. I watched the episode. Oh, okay. Well, at this point, like I said, the book was well underway, and I couldn't include stuff. This is the danger of writing tie-in books in a franchise that is an ongoing concern, because stuff is going to happen.
That's always, a risk that you got to take.
I remember when I was writing my Q books back in the day, I lived in fear of Voyager running a Q episode that was going to wipe out my entire trilogy before it was published, But okay, we just gotta, and given the time, publishing is slow and creaky, and given the time delays, it's like, okay, nope, I'm not. And thankfully, nobody at CBS came back to me and said, Greg, you have to work Pelia into this plot now, because that would have been a nightmare. That my already carefully constructed charts, diagrams, and everything. I think, okay, we're just going to let this one go. I didn't know about Pelia. 10 years from now, people will ask me, well, why didn't you mention Pelia in your book? I said, well, I didn't know about Pelia. She hadn't been introduced yet when I wrote that book. So it's like, well, why didn't you mention Archer in your, well, because Enterprise wasn't the thing when I wrote that book. It's like, Star Trek is always a work in progress.
You mentioned that, the getting this through, the publishing process as far as approvals and everything was fairly smooth. Did anybody have any guidance or anything on, like, especially the character of Gillian Taylor, and because she's not somebody who's really used in the books much. I feel like I just recently read something with her where she's like heading up it was one of the DTI books, one of Chris Bennett's books, that she like heads up a kind of a clinic for displaced people, people who are displaced in time or whatever. But like, I don't know. I guess, what were your thoughts on just like...
Oddly enough, no, I got no comments back or notes from CBS or on Gillian. Because like I said, mostly I think it's always been an issue if you're stepping on the toes of something, that's coming up soon, or a book that came, or possibly a book that's coming out, the month before yours. Gillian's appearances in Star Trek. She also appeared in a Debt of Honor, which was a graphic novel by Chris Claremont that came out back in the 90s, and which I went back and reread for inspiration. I think, I wasn't stepping on anybody's shoes of Gillian. I got no notes saying, it's not like, oh, no, the next movie is all about Gillian, and you have no.
We can hope we get something else with her.
Maybe Section 31 or something.
Who knows? But
that'd be so good.
We can infer that. No, I can literally say that, like I said, the notes were very minor. There wasn't a whole lot of instructions about what to do there or whatever. And I got no notes about Gillian whatsoever. Like I said, the only note I really got was like the heads up that not to pin down the dates of the eugenics wars, because Strange New World. I got a heads up that was going to reset that a little bit because of some time travel shenanigans. And that was really a matter of going in and vaguing up a few lines, and you need dates,
Well, I feel like we're going to need a TNG follow up to this book or something to see what else happens. Another few timelines. But Greg, it's been really cool talking to you today, and I'm if you want to kind of give it over to you to tell the listeners kind of what's coming up for you, where you're going to be, what are you working on, any trek in your future, and then also just how people can kind of stay in touch with you online.
Well, like I said, it depends on when this airs. My big plans is I am heading out to Shore Leave, which is my favorite Star Trek convention, and it is here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania this very weekend. So this weekend I will be at the Wyndham Hotel, and I'll be doing book signings and panels along with many of my other friends and colleagues who write Star Trek novels. There's going to be a whole passel of us there, plus various celebrity guests, including Robin Curtis, who plays Saavik. So that's going to be fun. I was joking with you before the meeting. I'd like to say I arranged for Robin Curtis to beam down to my hometown the week my book came out, but that is just sheerest coincidence. So, and I'm very thrilled by that, Beyond that, I've got an original novel coming out that I'm not at liberty to talk about. Believe it or not, my first non-franchise novel. It's only taking me 64 years or so, but I actually have. I wrote an original novel. It's signed up. I'm not at liberty to announce it yet. And on the Trek front, besides writing the novels, I've actually been keeping quite busy writing short stories for Star Trek Explorer magazine. For people who don't know, this is the official Star Trek magazine. And each issue features 2 original Star Trek stories. I'm not in every issue, but last I heard, I have a story. I know I have an issue issue 12 coming out next month, and that's a story, the teams of Saavik and Sulu, which is fun because they've actually never. I went back and watched the movies. They don't have any contact. Let me go back and see what their relationship is like. Oh, they don't have one. Saavik and Sulu exchange like maybe one line of dialogue in the TOS movies. They don't. So it was fun trying to flesh that out. And I believe I have another story. It's actually sitting on somebody's desk at CBS as we speak. That's tentatively scheduled for issue 14. But no, I've written probably 7 or 8 stories for the magazine. And those are interesting because those stories are only about 2,500 words long, tops. So going from writing big, thick, 130,000 word novels to trying to tell a Star Trek story in 2,500 words or less is a very interesting challenge. You're basically doing vignettes. But no, I've written now 7 or 8 of them, and they're all being collected in each story appears in the magazine originally, but there's also been a series of hardcover anthologies that reprint the stories. There's been, I think, 2 of them so far, and the 3rd one comes out in December. So, and that gives me a chance to actually dabble. I've done TNG stories. I've done some Voyager stories, lots of TOS stories. I even wrote a Koan story. It was my first Koan story in 17 years. So that was fun. It was weird going back and revisiting Koan and Marla after all these years. So. And like I said, I'm currently in a Saavik room, so I have another Saavik story coming out next month. So I've seen the art, and I'm not allowed to reveal it yet. And I'm just tormenting because I can't show anybody the art yet. So, but there's a very nice illustration of Sulu and Saavik together again for the first time. So, and that's it. Like I said, somewhere down the road, I will be shouting from the rooftops about my original novel. But beyond that, I've been working, editing, and waiting for my next big. I've got stuff. The thing about being a freelancer is you always have lots of trial balloons out there. You have outlines sitting on people's desks waiting to be approved, and I'm waiting to hear back on various projects. So, but the next book will probably 2025. I will have, believe it or not, my very first, not based on someone else's IP, original novel, which took me many years to write, but finally it's done. Yeah, honestly, I would just say quickly about that. The reason why I have not written an original novel is because I've been, this is a good problem to have, I always stress. I've been so busy writing Star Trek novels, Italian novels, it's hard to find. So honestly, this book took me about 4 years. The mystery book took me 4 years to write because I kept putting it aside for paying jobs, basically. I had to write this book on set. So, and indeed, it got put aside to write Star Trek novels and other fun things, Planet of the Apes novelizations or whatever. So, but yeah, so that's the thing I'll be shouting about in a while. And I'm sure there is more Star Trek in my future, including more short stories, and I've got outlines floating around.
Awesome.
So we'll see.
Well, yeah, where can people find you online to follow your writing? I'm
on Facebook. I have a personal page, which is like pets and family photos. I also have a Greg Cox author page, which I try to is more about plenty of my books and things. And I need to expand. I have a website, Greg Cox. Author.com, which is badly out of date and which I need to update in my free time. But yeah, I probably need to expand my social media presence, but that's it for now. And I hope to be booking lots of book signings. Honestly, I'm going to be everywhere. This is my first new Star Trek novel in 4 years. I tend to be out promoting the bejesus out of it for the next few weeks. Okay. Lining up book signings and talking to local libraries, etc. And sure leave this weekend.
Cool. Well, it's been great talking with you, and best of luck on all your future projects.
And it's great talking to someone who's actually read people who've actually read the books. As like I said, I'm dying of curiosity now. Just the whole thing of the books. It just landed, so keeping it. Oh, I also hang out a lot at the Trek bulletin board, the Trek BBS. I'm kind of a regular there as well. And I visit lots of Star Trek Facebook groups for both the original series and Star Trek book groups. Particularly, I spend too much time hanging out in Star Trek, fan groups on Facebook. That's my social media, world. So.
Well, it was great talking to Greg about the book, and someday down the line we'll have to talk about the spoilers behind this book because, oh my goodness, there were some moments that made me gasp as we were reading this. So I really enjoyed the book, and it's out now in paperback and in ebook, I believe.
Probably audiobook if I had to guess.
Probably, yeah. I think they're still doing them. And then our next read is going to be another Lost Era book. We're going to go back to Deny Thy Father by Jeff. I don't know how to pronounce the last name. Marriott. We'll go with
Marriott.
that. Yeah,
Marriott.
Jeff Marriott. So that's Marriott. So Deny Thy Father, which is I think that's a Riker storyline. So that'll be our next read here.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it was great talking to Greg, and I really liked the book, Lost to Eternity, and definitely read it. Get your own spoilers. It's a good mystery book for sure, and need some good mysteries in Star Trek. And so, Jonathan, why don't you tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you when you're not reading all these Star Trek books?
Well, I have a YouTube channel. It's my name at Jonathan Koan on YouTube, where I talk about all things books, all genres, including Star Trek and other Star franchises. And I also have a X/Twitter, I guess we'll call it Twix. I have a Twix account where at Jonathan Koan, where I talk mostly books, but I also talk movies and TV and politics and a few other things there. So if you want more other discussions there. And then I have a Facebook page, Jonathan Koan, where is just like my life stuff there. So that's where you can find me online.
Well, yeah, and you can find me. I'm most active on Goodreads and Letterboxd, but I also have a Twix account. I like that. I'm going to start using that at X and Instagram, and all of those places you can find me at Knitting Trekkie. And then I'm also on Facebook as well, and you'll find me poking around in the Babel Conference and other random Facebook groups. I feel like, Greg Cox mentioned he's poking around in all of the different fan groups, and I kind of do the same thing. So I see his posts from time to time. So just shout me out or something. I don't know, somewhere, but I'm horrible about posting anywhere except for like Goodreads anymore. So anyway, yes, definitely looking forward to next time's Lost Era book, Denied Thy Father. Hopefully it's a step up from some of the ones we've had. I don't want to go into it with low expectations, but we've got this one and one more, and then we'll be through the Lost Era. It won't be lost anymore. And so we'll see what we can come up with. But thank you everyone for listening, and until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.